Welcome to another explainer. I'm so thrilled to have you here today because we're going to unravel a truly fascinating reality. You know those crisp, solid lines you see separating countries on our world maps? Well, they are in many ways a total illusion. When we look at a map of South and Southeast Asia, we see these neatly colored shapes defining nations. But on the ground, those boundaries are living, breathing, and often highly contested spaces where history, resources, and power just constantly collide.
Okay, let's dive into this with a number that should completely reframe how we look at global stability. 2 billion. 2 billion people. That is roughly a third of the entire global population, and they currently live in countries affected by conflict. Now, while traditional direct wars between states have actually been declining, the violence hasn't just disappeared. It's shifted. It's moved to the margins, to the peripheries of states, manifesting as insurgencies, micro-conflicts, and these really protracted disputes right along the borderlands.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, the illusion of fixed borders. 2, the anatomy of a dispute. 3, who is really fighting. 4, flashpoints in Asia. And 5, beyond the map. Section 1, the illusion of fixed borders, redefining the map. We often incorrectly use two concepts interchangeably, borders and frontiers, but they're actually very different. A border is a rigid legal concept. It's a line of demarcation legally notifying the territorial limits of a state. But a frontier is a vague, ambiguous, and deeply political space. It's basically a zone of transition between different centers of power. South and Southeast Asia provide this incredible exemplar of the tensions that get unleashed when states try to forcibly convert these historically porous, living frontiers into rigid, legally defined borders. And historically, the process of drawing these lines was deeply flawed from the start. Colonial powers frequently just ignored ethnic, religious, and linguistic identities. But even on a purely geographical level, they used totally inappropriate boundary descriptions. They relied on vague topographical terms like the crest of a mountain, a range, or the mouth of a river. The problem with that? Well, geology and hydrology change. Rivers literally move. So when a border is based on shifting topography, it inevitably leads straight to modern conflicts over exactly where that line should be. Section 2, anatomy of a dispute. The engine driving conflict. Conflict in these regions is incredibly nuanced. It's rarely just a simple land grab. According to the Brunette-Jaley typology, we can break border disputes down into several distinct categories. Territorial disputes are the most complex because they're about the actual ownership of land, which undermines a state's integrity. Then you have positional disputes. That happens when countries agree a border exists, but they argue over the exact interpretation of the documents defining it. Next up are functional disputes, which aren't really about the line itself, but the policies applied there, things like immigration or customs. And finally, we have resource disputes, which occur when a critical resource just happens to straddle the boundary. And this brilliantly illustrates how fluid these categories actually are. You see, a conflict might start over a vaguely drawn colonial map, which makes it a positional dispute. But it can rapidly evolve into a full-blown territorial one, driven by modern nationalism or just a desire to project power. Now, competition over scarce resources is an absolutely massive driver of these conflicts. To put it in perspective, in this region, agriculture absorbs a staggering 70% of water usage. As populations and economies grow, the domestic demand for resources, specifically water, skyrockets. When a river crosses a disputed border, the downstream country is highly vulnerable to whatever the upstream country decides to do. Water scarcity isn't just an environmental issue here. It is a vital flashpoint for survival and conflict. Section 3. Who is really fighting? The new actors of conflict. If you think border disputes are just two national armies staring each other down across a fence, the modern reality is going to surprise you. Today's border disputes are characterized by an incredible multiplicity of transnational actors. Yes, for sure, state armies are there, but they're just part of a much larger, messy ecosystem. We're seeing non-state actors and cross-border militant movements. We're seeing ethno-linguistic and religious kinship groups whose loyalties stretch right across those lines drawn on the map. We're even seeing a massive proliferation of private security firms hired to protect state assets. And we absolutely cannot ignore the criminal element. Southeast Asia, for example, is challenged by incredibly aggressive transnational organized crime syndicates. We are talking about multi-billion-dollar industries here, particularly in the production and distribution of methamphetamine in places like Myanmar. These syndicates wield enormous financial power, which they then use to corrupt officials, undermine the rule of law,
and essentially take over the governance of these complex, mountainous, and historically undergoverned borderlands. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4, Flashpoints in Asia, on the ground. Let's look at how this actually plays out in reality. First up, the Thailand-Cambodia dispute over the Preah Vihear Temple. This dispute has deep roots in the colonial era, involving territory lost to British and French powers. Back in 1962, the International Court of Justice actually awarded ownership of the temple to Cambodia. But notice what happened in 2008. The conflict violently escalated again. Why? Actually, scratch that. It wasn't because the map changed, it was because of domestic politics in Thailand. The border became a political pawn in the internal struggle between Thai royalists and supporters of former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. It perfectly demonstrates how old colonial legacies can be unpredictably reignited by modern domestic agendas. Next, we examine the border between India and Pakistan, specifically over Jammu and Kashmir. Guys, this is the world's largest territorial dispute in terms of both the size of the contested area, over 300,000 square kilometers, and the population it affects, which is over 17.5 million people. Its origins trace back to the British departure from the subcontinent in 1947, leaving behind a legacy of countless deaths and these incredibly high-stakes military standoffs between two nuclear-armed powers. But here's the thing. The Kashmir dispute isn't just about land or historical pride. It's heavily exacerbated by resource competition. Tensions have spiked over India's construction of the Baghlihar Dam on the River Chenab in Indian-administered Kashmir. India essentially controls the upstream flow of these vital rivers. With the United Nations already defining Pakistan as a water-scarce country, impacted by reduced rainfall from climate change, India's control over these waters poses a severe vulnerability for Pakistan. This creates the very real looming threat of water-based conflict in the near future. For our third case study, let's look at the India-Nepal border. Now, historically, this has been a very peaceful, porous border with minimal restrictions on movement. But in 2015, disgruntled leaders of the Madhishi community in Nepal, who have deep sociocultural ties to India, protested Nepal's new constitution and blockaded the border. Nepal accused India of implicitly supporting this unofficial blockade, which frankly devastated Nepal's economy. This event took a traditionally open frontier and securitized it. It created what researchers call a new mental border between the two nations, fueled entirely by sociocultural kinship and regional geopolitics. Section 5. Beyond the map. The future of borders. So we've seen the history and the flashpoints, but there are some massive macro threats looming on the horizon that are going to rewrite this entire region. The borders of South and Southeast Asia are being subjected to immense global accelerators. Climate change is completely altering precipitation patterns and geography, aggravating resource scarcity. Crucially, the Himalayan glaciers, which supply water to several of South Asia's most essential rivers, are retreating. Disruptions to this water supply will have widespread, devastating consequences for downstream populations. Combine this environmental stress with the rising power of transnational organized crime eroding state control, and these supposedly static legal borders, they're turning into highly volatile living ecosystems. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question. As climate change, water scarcity, and powerful non-state actors continue to rewrite the geography and power dynamics of Asia, will traditional borders even survive as we know them today? The lines on our maps might look permanent, but as we've learned today, the ground beneath them is shifting faster than ever. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this leaves you eager to keep exploring the deep and fascinating realities of geopolitics. Keep questioning the map, and I'll see you next time.